Hi there again. It's a pleasure for me and it's a huge honor to present you Imma Calvo, who is Managing Director of Apps at Google. Imma is passionate about the role apps in redesigning and disrupting how consumers interact and connect with brands to create meaningful relationships and loyalty. Having worked and traveled for many years before, Imma has had an incredible career at Google for the past 13 years. Currently, she is Managing Director of Apps with previous experience in other industries such as retail, overall performance advertising, and brand. Originally from Barcelona, Imma has worked in many markets on Europe and the US, and she has an appreciation for the immense complexity and a company opportunity of being on the front edge of the industry and market. Imma started her career in Ireland in UK and was based in Silicon Valley for 11 years prior to relocating to New York in September 2021. Hello, Imma. Thank you for your presence here today. It's a pleasure that you are one of the speakers of the International FemHack. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you very much, Noelia. You ready for me to start?
Yeah, you can start wherever you want.
That's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor being here. Hello, FemHack. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever is your time. I think in Barcelona right now it's 7:30.
Yes.
So it's probably time for a glass of cava or a glass of wine or a cup of tea or coffee. I would certainly go for the cava, but whatever works for you. As Noelia has mentioned, my name is Imma Calvo. I'm currently based in New York and I run the ads business for Google in the Americas. I'm a Barcelona native, so it's particularly exciting for me to be here today because it just feels like coming home. I do these presentations regularly, but this one has the added pressure of having all of you and the city that raised me be part of it. So thank you for having me. I will also say that it's a particular honor to share the stage with so many accomplished women in technology, and also to be part of this community of all of you that have chosen to choose this field and frankly drive change. So thank you for being in technology. Technology is a lot of fun. They're just not used to us as women, right? So we're going to make it even more fun, and with many more, it's going to be even more exciting. So what we're going to do today with the time that we've got allocated is I'm going to start for about 20 minutes talking a little bit about my career, and at the same time talking a little bit about my passion for the ecosystem that I live in right now, which is that of apps. We're going to have a little bit of fun of it because what we're going to do is we're going to try and intersect my story with that of the ecosystem of apps right now. So let's see if it lands, but hopefully it will. After that, I think we have a fireside chat with Noelia, which I'm really looking forward to. And hopefully at the end, we have some time for Q&A. Sounds good?
Okay. Sounds really good.
Perfect. Let's get started I can't see anybody else but you, Noelia, so it sounds good to me. So let's move forward. Before I get into my own career story, I want to paint a picture to you, or imagine a picture, and that is my grandmother's neighborhood. I promise I'm going somewhere with this, so just bear with me. But my grandmother lived in the Gothic Quarter, right between the hidden churches, the expansive plazas, and the cobble streets. I will say that she walked on high heels on those cobble streets with the latest fashions, with pristine tights, always, never falling. And I always admired how she was able to do that. She lived right next to the La Boqueria market. And it's fair to say that she was an unapologetic fashionista. My grandmother had a really strong interest in the arts, particularly classical music, the opera, and literature. And she was a creature of habit. She was sort of like my case number one of understanding the complexities of the multifacets of each person. She is someone that greatly influenced my career throughout the years, but I never knew that that was the case until quite recently. And it's not because of the choices she made, but because of the choices she did not get a chance to make. So to a certain extent, I've spent my entire career looking for more options, creating more and more options for myself. And even more recently, as I relocated to New York, having lived in Silicon Valley, the reason why I did it is to offer my children more and more options. So let's talk a little bit about me, and we'll come back to my grandmother regularly throughout this story. I grew up in Gracia, which is a quaint new neighborhood in the north part of Barcelona. I went to the local school, and then I went to the local public high school. I actually don't know if my local public high school was in Gracia or it was in, I don't know if it's considered La Champla, but it was a Carrera Industria, La Sedeta, anyway. And then I intentionally chose to go to the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. I hope there's many of you graduates from Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. I studied political sciences. And yes, that comes as a shock. It still comes as a shock to me, because like many choices in my career, it was not necessarily intentional. I honestly have absolutely no idea why I chose political sciences back then. I still don't know why I chose it. But it doesn't really matter. I learned a lot, and I treasure some of the lessons from the professors that I had the privilege to work with. One of them, Professor Arcadi Oliveras, that unfortunately passed away, sadly, last year. But I learned a lot from the experience. It is also safe to say that that degree did not prepare me in any way for what I'm doing right now. That's okay, though. Your first degrees are not necessarily intended to prepare you for a next job. And they're intended to prepare you for getting out there in the world. There's a few things that, looking back, I wish I knew, right? And I wish I had had. I wish I had had a network of perspectives and mentors that had helped me make a more informed decision about my first degree. Frankly, I wish I had had platforms like this one, where a bunch of women could get together and basically think through and brainstorm of why are we making certain decisions in technology or not technology. And I wish I had considered those perspectives a lot more than I did back then. I don't know if they weren't available to me. I didn't feel them. Maybe they were available to me and I never looked for them. The reality is I don't have a technical degree and I work in technology. So while I've made the most of it, and we'll come back to this theme of making the most of it, it has to a certain extent helped me back. So for those of you that are in technology, I firmly believe that a technology degree gives you the frameworks to address every single problem in the future. So, and I work in business. Even though I'm in technology, I work in business. And I find that I've spent a long time working hard to hold my own in product management meetings because I simply don't always understand all the context that it's being discussed. But the transition from technology to business is a lot easier than from business to technology. A lot of my colleagues were engineers before. They are engineers, but they're now working in business. And I'm always amazed at how do they approach every single challenge with this rigorous logic, with all these frameworks, one after the other, that feel really, really natural to them. And I kind of regret, to a certain extent, not having had more of a background in technology. So all of this to say that if you are studying technology, good choice, amazing, you're going to do great, and you can transfer to business afterwards. If you're not, don't worry about it. You roll with the punches, you're also going to do well, right? But I just wanted to give you that context. Let me go back to my grandmother for a second. As I said before, my grandmother was a creature of habit. And as a kid, I used to spend Saturdays with her, and I used to kind of carefully study how she organized her day, what choices she made. Why did she go to a store that was 30 minutes away instead of shopping for produce at the store next door? Why did she choose the coffee shop that was at Palau de la Música instead of just going for a coffee right next door? And how she sort of lived her passions with the intensity that she did, always on the same days, always carefully scheduled throughout the week, and always and typically with the same people. As I grew older, I kind of wonder if the circumstances my grandmother found herself on were something that she had fully anticipated or chosen. And like many of the older generations, my grandmother married young to a much older man. She had to move to the Gothic Quarter, which was a very different neighborhood than the artsy neighborhood that she had grown up. And she kind of had to replicate that sense of home and art that she grew up with wherever she went. She didn't have all the choices in front of her, but she made choices where she had them, and she made the most of it. I made a very intentional choice to move away from Barcelona after I graduated, or to leave Barcelona after I graduated. My mother, who's probably listening, maybe doesn't understand, but she is listening, will say I didn't even wait until I graduated. I did my last exam, like many of you, I'm sure, and I just left it. And it's not because I wanted to run away from Barcelona, but certainly because the job market at the time in this space in Barcelona was not what I wanted it to be. If you remember, we just talked about the fact that I studied political science. It's very grateful for having done that, but I knew I had to study more. And in this case, I knew I wanted to study business. And I had to work. I was not in a position where I could continue to study and not work. So the idea of working full-time, studying full-time, and living independently, as a 20-year-old, I was not going to live with my parents anymore, was not an option for me available in Barcelona. So I started looking abroad, and then I started thinking about, if I move abroad, how I bring my Barcelona with me wherever I go. So within the options abroad, I found myself right in the middle of the Celtic Tiger, in the midst of an incredibly welcoming Irish community, and with a lot of first job options. We talked about my grandmother, and when I think about her, how she got creative within the circumstances that she was given, we say that creativity loves constraint, or constraint loves creativity, right? First jobs for many of us are all about constraint. They're not ever what we anticipated, but we made the most of it. And I did the same. The key is in knowing when you're ready to move on and move very quickly and not get stuck in the comfort zone of your first job. Because it will be very easy to just get comfortable in your first job and just go home for lunch and just be near your parents and just do the same for an ongoing basis. And I would just say, learn what you can and then move on as quickly as you possibly can. So with all of that, I ended up in the travel industry, and I spent many years doing many jobs. I started with very unrewarding jobs. Some of them, God, I don't know. I did admin jobs. I did contract management. Then I think I moved to help desk support. God help me, like help desk support. Then I did tech. My first tech job was on tech support. I knew nothing about tech. All I knew was like how to restart your computer at the time. And then gradually I would move back to marketing. I took my first team lead opportunity, and I did an awful lot of flyering. If any of you have done flyering, like distributing flyers and presentations in universities, that was my start in marketing, all the way to different management roles. Effectively, by the time I left the travel industry, after 10 years, I was the product manager, and I was in charge of a commercial portfolio. I had made the most of every job that I had had along the way to get me where I was. But that time, I had traveled the world, and that's one of the benefits of working in travel. And I had learned how to market. This is incredibly important. I had learned how to market myself, which I think is even more important. I had lived through the dot-com revolution. I'm going to just make a guess that many of you were not even born in the dot-com revolution, but I lived through it, and I saw the travel industry get digitized very, very quickly. And more importantly, I think I learned that from every job, you have a new leader, and with every leader, there's a learning opportunity. And I kind of got a sense for what the kind of leader I wanted to be, and more importantly, I got a sense for the kind of leader I never, ever wanted to report it to. And that's incredibly important. Know that type of leader you want to work for, and just run away from those that are just not going to add value to you. After 10 years in the travel industry, between the UK and Ireland, back and forth, you name it, it was time to kind of rethink the next step. I had done everything I could possibly do, and I was like, okay, where do we go next? And I was getting all these pressures to get back home. Settle down, settle down. I'm sure many of you hear it, like settle down. I was like, well, what am I doing? I don't know who to settle down with, where to settle down with, let alone I'm not done. I'm just not quite done, right? But there was that kind of, not from my family, I have to say, but certainly from my surroundings and my environment. And then I was intentional. We've talked about intentional and not intentional choices. I was intentional about applying to Google, and Google got back to me. And through many, many interviews, many doors brought me to being a successful applicant at Google. I guess part of it was luck, part of it was context, part of it was chance. I was in Ireland at the time. Ireland was in the middle of explosive growth for Google and for the Irish economy. And I don't know if you remember, but at the time, Ireland became the home and the hub for many European headquarters for international companies, particularly from the US. And Google was growing rapidly. I had some management experience. I had language skills. And more importantly, in my time abroad, I had learned to conceive confidence and competence in my interviews. So I got in. And as I said before, I was very intentional about why I wanted to apply to Google. And Google kind of changed my career. It gave me a confidence boost that my skills were transferable, that I could do what I was doing in other places and that I could learn in the process. And that's a very important moment in your career when you're like, well, I cannot just only do what I've been taught to do, but I can take some of the learnings and put them in a toolbox and then use them somewhere else and grow while I do that. So I think that transition to Google did that. We talked about first jobs not being intentional. Google was super intentional. I did not know what job I was going to do at Google, but I knew what I was looking for, right? Imagine when you're thinking about, it's just like partnerships or relationships or friendships. You don't really know what you want out of it, but you kind of want a common set of values, right? You want, and more importantly, you want to find yourself in an environment where you're going to be happy, but that is going to allow you to thrive and succeed. In addition to that, Google had what I was looking for, which was a global career, an ongoing global career, an opportunity to constantly learn. And I thought it had leadership values that were incredibly innovative to anything I had heard before. And I wanted to learn how to be an incredible leader. So after 10 years in travel and 2.5 years with Google in Ireland, which I enjoyed tremendously, I found myself to make another decision again, which was I was offered the opportunity to relocate to the US. I don't know if I was offered the opportunity or I saw it or we met somewhere in the middle, either or. Found myself one evening over a pint in Ireland, in Dublin, saying, do I move to the US or do I not? And this was like, I was already, I don't know, I think I was 30, 31 at the time, I can't remember. And God, I lost my train of thought where I was going with it. Well, yeah, I think I had options in Ireland. I could stay with Google in Ireland for sure. I could, and I also at the time, I kind of had options in Europe too. Options that in the short term, they felt good, right? Maybe there were more responsibility, maybe there were more pay, maybe from a hierarchical title perspective, you should never care about that. But from a hierarchical title perspective, at the time felt like, right. But I just knew I wasn't done, right? I didn't quite want to settle. And I was really intrigued by the opportunity of learning, again, if my skill set was transferable in a market as competitive as the US. That was what's particularly important to me. Can I work in a market that is as fast-paced as the US, and can I make it happen for myself? So I did. And after many years, 10 years, actually, almost 11 actually, in Silicon Valley, and many roles across different industries and leadership roles, I ended up in my dream job, which is apps, which I love. I always say that everything I've done in my career, from my studies to all my travel industry experience to my previous jobs in Google, have prepared me for this role right now. And the reason is because I kind of always seek, and I think you're getting to know me after 20 minutes of talking, I've always sought to be transferable. I've always looked for more, like what else can I learn? And as a result of that, I've kind of gravitated towards industries where there was a lot of ambiguity and chaos, right? So apps was like a perfect match. Like it was like a match. It's like if both swipe right at the same time, right? I don't know if that still exists, right? But it's just like a perfect match. It felt like the apps ecosystem is disruptive in nature, is innovative, it's concentrated, it moves incredibly fast, and And the people are just kind of cool, right? Like they're just people that I kind of want to hang out with. At the beginning, half the time I didn't understand what they were saying, but now we've picked up, to go back to my non-technical degrees. And it's just an environment that I feel very, very comfortable being with. So I said at the beginning, I promised I was going to connect the dots between my grandmother's story and the apps. So we're going to do this and close with that. And then, Noelia, I'll be talking to you for a minute. So there are effectively kind of three themes that I want to leave you with from my grandmother's story that are very relevant to apps today. The first one is this idea of reinvented routines. The second one is this sense of belonging. Right? We've talked about how my grandmother sought for that community, for that belonging in her new environment as much as she possibly did. And last but not least, creativity and innovation, which in apps, we got to talk about creativity and innovation. Let's start with routines. Flashback, almost, what is it? We're January now, almost 2 years ago, right? At the very beginning of the lockdown. And remember how everything we were used to was just all of a sudden taken away from us very, very quickly. All of the routines that we had in terms of how we bought groceries, how we went to school, how we worked out, how we connected with friends, everything just all of a sudden went away. And we were just locked in these four walls. And within the tragedy of the situation at the time, and it was incredibly tragic, something rather beautiful happened, which is that some companies and some brands came to the rescue and offered pretty much an app for every need that we ever had. And we solved that problem with an app. So when we needed food and groceries, companies very quickly figured out grocery delivery, and we got used to grocery delivery and with incredible grace for all of the people that did that grocery delivery when we couldn't leave the house. We got used to food delivery. We got used to, and then we learned how to socialize through virtually, right? We learned how to work virtually. We learned how to teach our kids virtually. Please, God, that should never happen again. I am never teaching my kids again. It's just an environment I don't want to be part of. But we learned to date virtually, right? I work with dating companies. You have no idea the amount of innovation that went into improving those cameras. Trust me, right? So we reinvented everything we were used to do it in a way that was digital. And then the beauty of it is that not only we did it digitally, but we evolved it. We did not just replicate what we had before, we made it better and with many more options. And many of us got used to those new improvements, right? Think about your relationship with food delivery, with coffee. Like in Barcelona, it's a little bit different because you walk around the city and you stop at any corner in a coffee shop and you grab a cortado. But in New York today is minus 11 degrees. So I do not leave the house for a coffee shop unless I know I can order ahead and I can customize it and it's be ready for me to pick up, right? So we kind of got indulged or entitled within the whole process. Jokes aside and moving on from reinvented routines to belonging, my grandmother seeked that belonging, right? And we have too. Have you ever stopped to think about how much community is being offered right now in every single digital experience that you never thought you needed it? Everything you do right now offers you a value for the app, whatever it is that they intend to do in the first place, but they also offer you the opportunity to connect with others that share the same purpose. Fitness is a great example. Not only they offer you workouts, but they offer you an opportunity to connect with others that work out the same way that you, that have the same goals, that, I don't know, you name it. Mental health apps. We've seen that with gaming communities. I'm pretty sure I've seen fintech. As you're doing your financial planning, you can also connect with other people that think the same way. God help us, right? But it happens. Every single app offering is giving us a sense of community because for so much time, we felt we didn't have it. I always joke, in the US, we talk a lot about this brand called Peloton, which is it's a fitness brand that they do spinning at home, right? You can see the bike, actually, I have it right behind me. But they also do many other sort of exercises. So I do yoga with them, running, you name it, whatever. Peloton became very, very, very successful during the pandemic because it offered an answer to something that we didn't have, which is fitness options. But the beauty with Peloton is the community that it created around it. So for many of us that work virtually and work in sales and connect with partners, the instant connection of dialing in and seeing somebody having a Peloton behind it, it was immediate. Because you knew that that person had partly survived the pandemic by working out like you on the Peloton. And immediately it was just like a match made in heaven. So what Peloton did is really took advantage of that community to explore other offerings and expand those offerings. We've seen that with fitness, we've seen that with mental health, we've seen that with so many other things. And the last sort of trend that resonates with my grandmother is this idea of creativity loves constraint, constraint loves creativity. So we've seen more than ever in the last 2 years, creativity in the digital space. And a lot of it has started in apps. Some of the things that we have seen AR-based avatar fashion shows. So Balenciaga was the first one that did it, but pretty much every fashion brand has done an avatar-based fashion show. In the summer of 2022, don't know how many gamers there are in the audience, but in the summer of 2022, we saw college graduations on Minecraft. Do any of you play Minecraft? I'm sure many people do, right? Minecraft is an incredibly popular game right now. Actually, can we pause on Minecraft? I'm pretty sure my kids learned to spell on Minecraft. It was not from reading Harry Potter. It was certainly from Minecraft. But we saw graduations on Minecraft because people could not go to physically graduate to their colleges or universities. We saw music streaming, like concerts. I think we saw Travis Scott and Fortnite and Ariana Grande and Fortnite. And we saw the healthcare system evolve to a point that you rarely have to go to the doctor to get diagnosed. You can pretty much do everything. So within all this innovation in the last 2 years, what we have seen is that the consumer journey has changed and the consumer expectations have changed. And to close, what I kind of want to share with you is, as you are investing in technology and as you are learning technology, it's also really important that you learn how the consumer behaves and how the consumer has evolved. Because if you do that, you'll be able to build the bridges between the two of those. But also, you will have a lot more options ahead in front of you. And going back to my original point, I wish I had a technology degree because, frankly, it would give me more options. And being able to bridge the gap between technology and the needs of the consumer would also give you a lot more options. With that, and as I reflect to my story, I also want to make it very clear, my career has been intentionally global. I've spent more than 20 years, I'm not going to share my age, but I've spent more than 20 years abroad, but I've never, ever forgotten home. And Barcelona and the city that raised me have been very much a part of my identity. So I've always found ways to connect back to the community that raised me. And some of the work that I do is whether I invest or work with startups in the city, or whether I work with companies that are looking to expand their international efforts, or whether I do ad hoc consultancy, the intention is always to offer a lot more options to those that came behind me that I didn't have. Back in the time, I didn't feel I had an option. And while I strongly recommend a global career, it's also really, really sad to see that so many people feel that they don't have an option in the city that they grew up with. And I think it would be wonderful that those that have all that experience have options when they come back. That's all. Choose whatever your path is. But I think it will be really important for all of us to work together for that to happen. With that, thank you so much for having me. I am looking forward to talking to Noelia now for a few minutes.
Wow, such an inspiring talk. I'm totally astonished, especially because we are right now from Barcelona, and that's like so close to us, everything that you have said. I really like how you connect the dots with your grandmother. It has been really emotional, and I loved everything that you said, but now I have some questions for you. So I will start. If you could give yourself a piece of advice 20, 25 years ago, what would it be?
I think we've talked a little bit about this, right? There's this myth that careers are meticulously planned and very intentional, right? I mean, I live in New York right now, and I've seen how competitive this is. So I think in New York, they believe that whatever nursery you choose when you're born is going to dictate whether you get into Yale or not. But that's an exaggeration. The reality is that careers are not that meticulously planned, right? I don't know, Noelia, if you've ever experienced that, and I hope there's no HR people in the call, right? But have you ever been in interviews with HR ask you where you want to be in 5 years or 10 years from now?
Yeah.
In your 20s, right? People used to ask me that. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. I don't know where I'm going to be tomorrow. I have no idea where I'm going to be next weekend. How am I going to know where I'm going to be in 10 years? Like, it's just the most ridiculous question to ask ever. I know it helps you paint the picture and a path, and I can understand the value to it. But the reality is that none of us think that way, right? Yeah. Some cases we make intentional choices, and I've shared some of those. And in some cases, we just roll with the punches. Like, careers are fluid. Be open to what may come to you, right? I took my first director job at Google was not what I had planned at all, right? As a matter of fact, I probably took a piece of business that nobody else wanted. That's why they gave it to me, because nobody else wanted it. But I made the most of it, and I turned it around, and I became a director as a result of that. Like, so just kind of be fluid with what's coming to you, and learn to make the most, and then learn to move on if it doesn't work as quickly as you can.
Perfect. Sounds really good. And I agree with you with the question on how do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years. It's always difficult to me to answer that. Let's continue. What are a few of the most important skills you have developed along the way?
I think in my talk, I described this idea of having a toolbox of skills, right? That you sort of leverage as you move from one role to another, right? So I'm a big fan of transferability. I think the ability to navigate change and manage change is incredibly important. And to that, you kind of have to run yourself in a way that you can, wherever they throw you, you're going to be able to survive. Right? So that is incredibly important. And that's a muscle you got to flex. If you do the same your entire career, whenever a change is imposed at you, and it will, you're not going to be able to know how to react. So I think this idea of transferability and building the confidence that whatever your next role is going to be, you are going to be okay, I think it's really important. And to that, you kind of have to work on skills that will help you be transferable, right? Because at the end of the day, in a leadership capacity, the challenges are not that different all the time. You're navigating ambiguity, you're building teams, you're dismantling teams, you're orging, you're reorging, you're building culture, you're changing culture, you're being more inclusive. I mean, the challenges are similar, right? So learning how to adapt and knowing what your leadership style is to adapt to that, I think it's important. The second one is a little bit trickier. Noelia, I think you are from Barcelona as well, and I think you work in Paris or in France right now, right? Even though you're based here. So in Europe, it's a little bit different. I'm sure for you, it was very important to learn French, right? Yeah. But when I moved to the US, I already had been operating in English for more than 10 years, right? But I remember vividly moving to the US and working in the US market and thinking, every time I was in a meeting, thinking, wow, these people communicate so well. Has that happened to you? It's like, I have no idea what he said, but God, he said it so well, right? Like, and I think I always say, Americans, no matter what education system you've been on, and it's very different, very varied, and unfortunately, very diverse in the US, right? But they are trained, and I see it with my kids, they are trained from a very young age to communicate with purpose. They are succinct, they are pointed, they are structured, and they're very confident in what they say. Yeah. So I had to learn how to do that coming over to the US. And it's not natural, it is not natural to women, first of all. And as Europeans, it's definitely not natural because it constantly feels like you're bragging, right? So it's something I had to do. And it's also a difficult tension because you gotta learn to communicate concisely and effectively, but at the same time, you don't want to lose your essence and your authenticity in the process. But I always say that I spent many years in the US trying to blend in. And in the last few years, I've tried to bring some of my passion, right? And some of my authentic self into my communication style. Because I think that makes it different, right? And diversity is really good. So that balance is important. But I do think whatever market you go to work with, first of all, learn the language. And then secondly, learn the most effective way to influence the audience that you're working with. And in some cases, that could be the language for sure, but it's definitely the cultural differences on how to learn to influence and bring people along with your ideas. And I think that's a very important skill to learn for sure.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. From your point of view, what do companies need to hear?
Today?
Yeah.
We've talked about agility and adaptability and knowing about the customer and having the customer at the center stage of everything. Like I work with a lot of businesses now that are not necessarily app first, but that are becoming app, and their app is becoming a big part of their strategy, and that's because they've seen how the consumers have gone to apps. So I think that's certainly important. The other one is, it's something that I firmly believe that we're in a very pivotal time now when it comes to business. And we've had a lot of learnings from the last 2 years. Many of those we've talked about. One very special outcome that has come out within the tragedy of the pandemic is this idea of brand purpose. Never before the values that are aligned to a brand have been more important than right now. And there's a reason why, because during the pandemic, consumers very quickly decided which brands were relevant to them at the time that they needed them and which brands were off mark. And there was a very difficult tension between being present when you were needed and not appearing opportunistic. And all of that evolved into coming down to values. We know from Gen Z that they will follow the brands that align with their own values, right? So brands have had to kind of reinvent themselves, and businesses have had to reinvent themselves to really think not only about what is my value proposition, what I offer, but really what is my brand purpose? What do I stand for, right? And I think we've seen many iterations of this throughout the pandemic, of companies that have got it really well and others that haven't. I could give you many examples from the US, but I was in Barcelona over the holidays in December, which was fantastic. Not from an Omicron perspective, but everything else was fantastic. And I remember seeing an ad from Decathlon at the time. And please don't take this as a PR for Decathlon. I don't know them, right? I've never worked with them. But I remember seeing the ad and I thought, this is very well done. Because what the ad did was, it talked about the idea of reconnecting relationships with a purpose. So what it basically told you is make sports a purpose, and use it as an excuse or a reason, more than excuse, as a reason to reconnect with somebody that you found yourself distant from over the pandemic. And I thought it was very beautiful because effectively it was telling you, do more sports and use our products to do sports. But it did it in a way that felt really, really human and very relevant at the time, which is that many relationships have been broken or distanced in the last 2 years. Yeah. And we're all trying to find ways to reconnect. And in many cases, it feels very awkward to do so.
Yeah.
So using sports as a reason to reconnect. And I thought it was just particularly well done. So I think many brands are finding themselves with the difficult situation of thinking about what their brand message is and how they convey this purpose. And those that do it well and balance the need for relevance with the brand values, I think are going to go a long way for sure.
Great. Sounds great. Okay, what have you learned at Google about leadership? How have you changed since becoming a leader?
Ooh, how have I don't know how I've changed since becoming a leader. So I hope my bosses don't get offended by this, because I certainly have had a lot of mentors ahead of me and bosses that I've learned tremendously from. Google is just such a school of management that I've had the privilege of working pretty much with everybody I've worked with. I've learned a lot from. But and I don't think it's exclusive to Google, but you learn a lot more from the people that work for you or with you than the people you work for. And I've had to be very, very humble about that. I've managed business people, I've managed technical people. The technical people have been difficult because at the beginning, I didn't understand half of what they were saying. But I think being open to the fact that you don't have all the answers, right? That you solve problems together. And the more open and transparent you are to problem solving with your team and hearing how they would solve it and doing it together, the more sustainable and effective the outcome of that problem solving would be. Much more than expecting to get the answer from your boss and just simply executing it. So I think Google is just incredibly democratic and people-driven, and when it comes to decision making. The consequence is that sometimes we're slower to move, but it certainly helps that when we make decisions, the team is behind it and the team has felt that they're part of it. So I think that's certainly one of the things. And then the second one is, I think I've tried, and I think I try to be very humble every single day, because as I said, I grew up in Gracia in Barcelona. Now I've worked 10 years in Silicon Valley at Google, and now I work in New York. And honestly, every single day I have to pinch myself that I have the privilege of working with the people that I work with and learning from. So I think humility and thankful, being very graceful to the opportunities that have been given to you and to the people that have been ahead. It's definitely something that I've learned as a leader, for sure.
That's amazing. I really like what you said about humility and being humble, because sometimes in the professional life we sometimes forget about it, and I think it's really, really important to keep that in mind as an employee, as a leader, or it doesn't matter in which position you are. So thank you very much for that, because I really agree on that point. Okay, then, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to this group, to the FemHack audience?
So as I said earlier, 20 plus years ago, if you had told me that I would be running the apps business in the US for Google, absolutely no idea, right? No idea. I never, ever in my wildest dreams would have even thought that there was a system there, or an ecosystem was called apps, right? And I think with a lot of my choices, I'm sure I was lucky. There was a lot of situations where I was in the right time and the right place. But I worked really hard to be agile and transferable. And to the beginning of my story, I was very intentional about creating a lot of options for myself. So if I can give you any piece of advice, is be very open to all the options ahead of you. And let me tell you something. I remember when I left, and I'm laughing now and I shouldn't, but when I left for Ireland, during the times that I was living in the UK, every time I was going home for a weekend or whatever, so many friends of mine were saying, well, do you like that? Do you like the weather? Do you like the food? Do you like well, frankly, in my 20s, I was drunk half the time, right? Because I lived in Ireland and the weather is bad. So, but I'm exaggerating. Please don't think that you have to be drunk to work in Ireland. That's not the connotation. But it was certainly, there was things about the UK and Ireland that were rough, right? And they would say, I just love the fact that I have a job in Barcelona and I can go home for lunch. I was like, yeah, I think that's wonderful for you, but what would happen if you had a job in Paris and you could go home for lunch? What would happen if you actually had lunch with your colleagues, right? So I think just being very, very open to options and knowing that you can create a family and a sense of home anywhere you go. I've lived in many places and I've never, and I genuinely say that, never ever felt lonely. And it's because you create your own happiness. I am also very aware that my circumstances and my choices have been supported by the people that I've had around me, right? So I've been very privileged to have a brother that has stayed home and has taken care of my family while I was traveling. And that's incredibly important. Many people don't have those choices. They have to take care of family, and I'm very aware of that, right? But to the extent that you can create options for yourself, think about a global career for yourself, because I think there's a lot of learnings. And I will close with saying that I hope there's a time where no matter where life and career has taken you, you can choose to come home and have the options that you want at home and make an impact in Barcelona too. But until then, the world is your oyster and explore it. It's worked for me.
Thank you very much for that answer. I will keep in mind the sentence that you can make your own happiness. I really like that. Just for your information, a lot of questions are on our chat in Twitch. I don't think that we have time to answer them all. I will pick one and see if we have time for a second one. One person asks, well, hi Imma, you have moved countries several times in your career. What are your recommendations to deal with country moves and its impact in your family? In your family?
Really good question. I never felt homesick, and I think it's because I always knew I was a flight away. Whether it was in Ireland or in the UK or in Paris, I lived in Paris for a while, or even in California with a 14-hour flight away, I knew I could get home in a flight. The pandemic changed that. And I had to make choices. Frankly, one of the reasons why I moved to New York was to be closer, because if my family ever needed me, I could be closer. So make the move, but also think about what are the guardrails that you're putting around yourself so that if you have to get home, you can do that. And then train your family to communicate with you differently. You are going to be 9 hours different. You're going to be 6 hours different, 12-hour difference, whatever you are. How can we make sure that we're present and available despite that difference? And then make the most of the times that you are together. Like my mother and I didn't really get on before I left. Like honestly, we didn't, right? In my 20s, we didn't. But since I've lived abroad, every time she's come to visit me or I've come to Barcelona, we just created a very intentional link, right? And I think that has been very, very special. I'll give you another piece of advice for those of you that plan on having kids. My name is Imma Calvo, but my parents actually named me Immaculada. I don't know why they thought this was a great idea at the time, but clearly they did it, right? Can you imagine the bureaucracy of having to spell Immaculada in Paris, in London, in Dublin, or the United States? Brutal, like insane, right? So my husband and I, when we had kids, we decided to name them the shortest possible names, pronounced the same way anywhere in the world. So my kids are named Max and Kai, M-A-X-K-A-I. Easy, same pronunciation, and they don't have middle names. They have one last name. It's easy peasy, right? So tactical advice for those of you relocating. And the last one is, you can make home wherever you go. A lot of people have the tendency to lean in on the expat community wherever you're going, and that's important. In California, we had, I think Anna was one of the speakers today or tomorrow, yeah. Honestly. We had a really strong sense of community within the Catalans in California, and that we were very, very active. And I think it was, especially at very difficult times in the last few years, it was really rewarding to have. But don't lean in exclusively on the expat community, because then you're just not allowing yourself to grow. So make friends where you are. Some of my best friends today, they're Irish. and I have incredible relationships with them. And I think I've made friends in Ireland, I've made friends in the UK. My wedding was full of people from all over the world, right? So just be open to really immersing yourself in the community and learning from the country that has welcomed you, whatever that is.
Thank you very much for that answer. I think that we will have time for one more. There's a person who wants to know that to get into a director position by P or C level, is it necessary to get knowledge in business? And could you put an example of business skills which could be kind of mandatory to learn or acquire to become a VP or director?
So no, it is not necessary to have studied business to be a director. Google is an engineering organization, everybody knows that, and we've got incredibly knowledgeable directors, VPs, and senior people way above my level that have come through the engineering background, and frankly, they're the ones that create the products that all of us benefit from, and we treasure them. So no, absolutely not. Skills in business. I think the ability, especially in my case, I work in sales. So the capacity to understand the business objectives of the organizations you are engaging with is incredibly important. And not think through those from a Google lens or from your own company lens, right? So how am I going to sell what I'm selling to them, but more about what's most important to those particular businesses that I engage with, from a financial standpoint, from a people standpoint, from a growth standpoint, from an international expansion standpoint, learning what their objectives are, how they measure success. And for that, it's incredibly important that you've studied some sort of financial background or some sort of economics, because it will give you a foundation of how people measure success in business, and then adapting your solutions to what their objectives are. And as I say, specifically to skills, I would strongly recommend anything on finance or economics would probably help you have more relatable and relevant conversations with very senior execs at different companies.
Great, thank you very much for your answer. I can tell you that the audience, the public, is really, really grateful and thanks you for the advices and for this conference. The chat has many comments and many questions. It's a pity we are not able to solve them all, but thank you very much, Imma, for your participation. It has been a pleasure, at least for me, personally speaking, it has been a pleasure. I really enjoyed your study, and thank you very much. Thanks to all the speakers joining the FemHack. It's thanks to you that's possible as well. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon all over the world. And thanks for your participation again.
Thank you, Noelia. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, FemHack, and continue the excellent work. This has been a pleasure to be part of.
Thank you very much. And for the public, we will be back in 2 minutes with the closing of the event of today. So